Hey guys, Chris Dunn here, aka the Boogie Man. On this episode of Boogie Tech, we're going to do something a little different because if you've actually watched the opening of Boogie Tech, it says hot rod gasser and fabrication. Today's about fabrication, and it relates to hot rods and it relates to drag cars and race cars. And I think it's so interesting. You wouldn't know how much of the race car industry has took things from the aircraft industry. And a lot of things you see on a race car was designed for aircraft. And then after World War II, you know, a lot of things, the guys, I guess it was building airplanes and aircrafts and this and that, kind of got into racing and the things they had learned and the materials it was made, they transferred it over into racing. I did a little research even as back as Formula One. Some of the things went into Formula One. Drag cars today are all made stuff come from the aircraft industry. Behind me here is a 1959 Bell 47. To make this easier, because you don't know it, it's like the MASH helicopter off of MASH, okay? This is one of the first actual helicopter designs and probably one of the first helicopters to be marketed is the Bell 47. What it's doing here is my father and my brother both own helicopters. My brother's a pilot, he's an A&P mechanic, he has his IA. What happened is he bought this helicopter because number one, they love them. It's old, you know, they love to restore these old Bell 47s. It had a hard landing and the engine mount broke and it did some damage to the airframe. So I built this stuff, set it on the jig here on our jig table here in the shop. You know, this is not, we do industrial stuff over here. We're done right, by the way. We're not in the boogie cave. Typically we're in the boogie cave. Today we're actually where we make the money at. This is done right. What we've done is we've mounted this thing on here, took and pulled and pushed and got the airframe straight, and then we're going to clip this out. The reason this works to what we're talking about is this whole chassis is chrome molle tubing, okay? And chrome molle tubing is probably the main structural item in all drag cars, from top fuel down to your normal bracket guy that's just got a Camaro. You know, about all of them are chrome molle tubing. Chrome molle tubing, believe it or not, was designed for the aircraft industry in the 1920s. So chrome molle tubing's been around since the 1920s. The Army and Navy needed a steel, a lightweight, strong steel to replace wood. Because back, you know, prior to the 20s, most airframes was wood. They commissioned companies to come up with a lightweight, strong tubing to replace the wood in the airframes. And that's how you got 4130 chrome molle tubing. There's number one. There's the first thing that we can go from the aircraft industry that went into hell, modern day drag cars and race cars. The next item we're going to talk about that everybody with a race car, I don't care if it's roundy round, drag racing, trophy truck, motorcycle, knows what this is. This is a Zeus fastener. I call it a Zeus fastener. That ain't how it's really pronounced. It's a Zeus fastener. D-Z-U-S, because the man William Zeus designed it. Now here's the kicker. I bet y'all didn't know that all Zeus fasteners was designed in 1934. That's how old these things are. 1934. When you go do this, go to your drag car and take the hood off or the scoop off, or roundy round guys, I think, put the windows in with these. That's 70-plus-year-old technology you're using. And you don't apply that. You're like, yo, but why did he do this? This guy designed this for the aircraft industry. It's to keep panels and access compartments and stuff like this on an airplane. So there's number two. All right, so chrome molle tubing that we use in race cars come from the aircraft industry. A Zeus fastener, whether it's this one or singles, come from the aircraft industry. You'd be surprised what comes from the aircraft industry that we have put into modern day race cars that goes so far back to, we don't realize how far back it goes. It's amazing to me that this thing was invented in 1934. The simplicity of how this works, 1934, and we still use it today. And we ain't changed the design. It's the same design from 1934. That's just talking about how cool is that. I mean, that's just badass. I say too much, but it is badass. The next thing is I've got to TIG weld all of this, okay? Because it's chrome molle, and that's the best way to really weld chrome molle, and that's the acceptable repair that I have to do on this. To repair this helicopter, I have to go by strict FAA guidelines of a repair. And on top of this, I'm being supervised by an A&P mechanic and an IA. So that means everything that I do, they have to double check, make sure that it meets FAA guidelines. So that, it's kind of like when you get your drag car built and you get it inspected. Imagine that 10 times more aggravating, because, everything has to be right and perfect. And it ain't just, it's meeting a set of federal guidelines is just crazy. This is a very time-consuming process. But going back to what we was talking about is the TIG. TIG welding's how I'm on the weld this. TIG welding, which everybody that's watched American Choppers, Jesse James probably got the TIG welder back on the map during the 90s with his show. TIG welding is tungsten inert gas. That's what it stands for. Here's a kicker that I bet a lot of people didn't know. TIG welding was perfected in the aircraft industry. 1941, Russell Meredith at Northrop Aircraft perfected the process of TIG welding. It was not called TIG welding yet, it was called heliarc. If you got a granddaddy or you got an older person you ever been around talking about, hey man, can you heliarc this for me? They're talking about a TIG rig. I've got, older people, my dad and some older people talk about, I need to get something heliarc. Well, it took me forever. What are you talking about? Well, they're talking about a TIG rig. The original gas that a TIG rig used was helium. So it called a heliarc, and it used a tungsten arc. So that's where it comes from, heliarc. Now we use different mixes, mainly argon, 100% argon is what you use, but there is some argon helium mixes, and that list can go on forever. It goes back again. Stuff that we're using in race cars and performance cars all come from the aircraft industry. And I'm talking about not yesterday, I'm talking about 70, 80 plus years ago that this stuff come. This is how far ahead this was. If you was in here right now looking at this aircraft and you look at the quality and the craftsmanship of this aircraft. Now this is a 59 model. And believe it or not, in aircraft years, that's fairly new. It's amazing the craftsmanship of this 1959 model aircraft that's made out of chrome molle that has Zeus fasteners on it. And it was TIG welded together. So it's amazing to me how we progress from here. That's the end of my story. I hope it was educational tonight. It was just one of them things that I'm sitting here working on this thing, which is a cool project. I don't always just want to work on hot rods and gassers and stuff. I like a challenge, and this is a challenge. So I hope you enjoy this episode. On the tip of the day, we're going to take a minute and we're going to talk about in my lifetime of my 46 years on this earth, if I've been asked this question once, I've been asked, I promise you, 176 times in my lifetime. And the question is, hey man, I'm fixing to go buy a welding machine. What kind of welding machine do I need to go buy? Or I get a friend that calls up, man, I'm here at the Harbor Freight. They got a plasma cutter. It ain't but $129. Man, that's the deal. Should I buy? I get these questions so much that I'm gonna go ahead and hopefully nobody will ever ask me again or pick up the telephone because they just go to this YouTube video. Here's my tip of the day to you on welding machines. There's 3 manufacturers of welding machines that's been around the longest. Lincoln, Miller, and Hobart. That's 3 of the machines you buy. Now, there is some more modern stuff out. ESOPs come on. There is some stuff like that out that is good quality stuff. Now, don't get me wrong. But let me tell you how you do this with a welding machine. Buy a welding machine that don't lose value. A good MIG that's even 10 years old is still worth $1,000 more. Okay? A good MIG that'll work is $1,000 more. If it's a Miller, if it's a Lincoln, and if it's a good Hobart. Think about that when you're going to buy a welding machine. Also, the reason I'm a miller man. Now, in Boogie Cave next door, there's nothing but millers. My TIG rig's miller, my MIG is miller. I just grew up miller. The story behind that is the first MIG we ever owned was an old used MIG Daddy bought used, and it was an old 135 miller that you actually pulled the cable. This is how you set the heat settings now. You actually pulled it out and you stuck it in another hole to raise the heat. Seriously, that's the first MIG we ever had. I learned how to do that like a driver. We bought this MIG, and it was 15 years old then. I just fell in love with millers. I love the way they weld. Now, if you come over here into Dunright, it's Lincoln. There's Lincoln TIGs, there's Lincoln MIGs. Daddy's a Lincoln. He's old school. Lincoln, Lincoln, Lincoln. But my point is, name brand stuff holds their value. And when name brand stuff like a Miller, a Lincoln, or a Hobart tears up, you can get parts to fix it. I don't care if it's 10 years old. Typically, even if a boarding one goes out that's 10 years old, you can find a repairman locally or go to your local welding shop or supply guy. They gonna know somebody that repairs welding machines that can repair it. So the tip of the day is, listen, don't buy shit. If you buy shit, you get shit. When you buy a welding machine, and I grant you this, well, I use it to make a living. No, you're not using it to make a living. But if it tears up, you want to fix it, and if you ever need to sell it, it needs to be worth something. So remember, stick with Lincoln, Miller, Hobart. Chris Dunn, a.k.a. the Boogie Man.